Okay, Pete, we're live. I gotta do some housekeeping here first. See who was here first. I give out pine points. Have you watched my channel, Pete?
I kind of stopped watching it.
Pagan. Heathen. I understand why, though. Ben Roberts was here first. 1,000 pine points to you. Thank you so much. This will be a little bit different live stream than usual, guys. This will be...
Good to see that pine points are still alive.
Pine points are still alive, yeah. Do you know that they have meaning and purpose, right?
Oh yeah, what is the meaning and purpose now?
If you get 1 million pine points, you get an all-expense paid trip with me to the luxurious Tropicana Casino and Spa in the luxurious city of Las Vegas. But I think I'm only going to do it during the next 4 weeks. So...
So no one's going to reach the pine by then. Didn't we have a back in the day? If you got a certain number of pine points, we laminated a membership card for you into some made up club.
Yeah, you know that I think I sort of remember that, and that's a great idea. I need to contact the home office in Wichita, Kansas, and ask them what's the deal with that, because I have a crew of about 50 people working in Wichita for the PineCreek channel. Yeah. Yes. And I told them to don't stay
working from home.
No. I don't like any of them. And
I see.
So I just say, keep working, and if you die, you die. No, that's
terrible. Always knew you were a bad person.
I'm a bad person. Okay, so I know Pete from Blab Days, which I think what year was that? 2013. It started
13 or 14. I think it was 14.
And so
I could be wrong.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
And Blab was a platform where you have different hosts doing videos like this, and then people could just jump in and watch whatever they want and jump out, and they could even jump on into the screen very easily. It was a great platform, one of the best I've ever seen, but it took up so much bandwidth and was so expensive that they shut it down. And but that's how I met Pete, and that's how I met Cam, that's how I met Chet, that's how I met Billy. Basically, the mods that I have on this channel were from that day. And so I don't remember the first time we met on Blab, but you used to host a show on Blab, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was it called?
Science Unplugged.
Science Unplugged.
Theme song composed by Billy Ballou.
Oh, yes. And speaking of which, my intro theme for my channel with the voice of Carl Sagan is from you.
Oh, you still use that?
I still use that. That's when a new subscriber hits my channel, they'll hear your voice.
Oh, I haven't been getting my royalty check yet, so no, I'll have to follow up on that.
Well, can you do a little bit of Carl Sagan and tell me? Let me ask you here. How many people do you think will be infected with the coronavirus, Carl Sagan?
Oh, no, I don't want to go there.
Billions and billions. No. Okay.
How many viral? Well, it's not even. That doesn't even make viral particles are there now in the population? Billions upon billions of viral particles continually replicating within the human system, spreading stealthily from one individual to the next.
You notice how you have to tighten up your whole neck and jaw to make that work. Why don't you tell everybody what you do for a living?
So I have a PhD in molecular genetics and microbiology, and I currently function as an infectious disease scientist within the biopharmaceutical industry.
Okay, so you're not just a farm kid from Canada then on this topic. Okay.
No.
Well, where do you want to start with this? I feel like I just have like some meaty questions here. And maybe we should get right to it, and then we can draw back to it. But what you do, is it to come up with a cure for the coronavirus?
Well, my specialty is bacterial pathogens. So I've spent my career trying to develop cures and treatments to treat antibiotic-resistant infections. But I have exposure to things going on around the coronavirus as well. So, So I'm knowledgeable about the subject.
Okay, I don't want to get into politics, but a certain someone said that we'll have a vaccine very soon on TV. Is that true?
Well, it depends on your definition of very soon within the vaccine space. So the timelines that are being predicted as far as vaccine development goes right now is a year to 2 years, a year and a half, if things go well. That meaning that, there's no hiccups, there's no adverse effects in the testing of the, if things go well, we can hopefully see a vaccine with anywhere between a year to 2 years, which has never been done before. That is the fastest that it is taken for a vaccine to be developed. But the approach that's taken now is actually, it's a three-pronged approach. So the vaccine approach is at the end, sort of is like the number three of the three prongs. Number one is to have the industry essentially test molecules that are already approved for all other things. So anything that you think we can throw at this virus, essentially the kitchen sink approach, to stop it from replicating, stop it from infecting people, helping to mitigate some of the the symptoms and effects that are generated by the infection. So companies are right now going through the drugs that they have that are already approved for other things and or near approval, and just throwing this at the virus and seeing if it has any effect.
And have they found any?
So there are a couple of candidates out there that people are testing. We don't have one right now that we know works. There was a drug called remdesivir produced by the company Gilead that was developed. I think they spent like 10 years developing this drug. It was tried in a trial for Ebola. And failed. It didn't work against Ebola, so now they're testing it against against the coronavirus. They have some trials going on in China, I believe, testing it on patients, and I think some of the data from that should read out in April sometime, but don't quote me on that, but fairly soon. So we don't know. I think in test tubes, it's called in vitro, essentially, analysis. I think they show
I know all about that.
Yes, they show some effect of the drug on the virus, but what happens in a test tube is vastly different from what happens in a human. So we don't know. So there are other companies that are looking at compounds. So that's the first approach. That'd be like the fastest thing, is to just use something that's already approved that we know is safe in humans and try and repurpose it for this. If we can find something like that right away, that would be fantastic.
I know you got two other things to say, but if it's approved in, let's say, Italy, but not in the United States, can they quickly approve it?
I think the way things are going now, you would probably see like an expedited approval for other countries as well.
Okay. What are the other two ways?
Yeah, that would be my guess. Plus, if there was like good data behind it, also. The second approach is to develop what's called monoclonal antibodies, and this is an area that I have experience with. And essentially, what this is taking parts of the virus and giving it to mice. And that's one way to do it. There's a couple of ways to get monoclonal antibodies. I'll tell you both ways. Giving it to mice, have mice generate an immune response to the virus, and then we take those antibodies out of the mice and then scale them up, and then we can give those antibodies to patients. And those antibodies hopefully can neutralize the virus, and that's good, because that can be used not only as a prophylactic treatment, so give it to healthy people so that they don't get infected with the virus, but it can also potentially be used as a treatment of people who are already infected. So it's a two-pronged approach. Actually, there's four things I want to say.
Okay, well, hang on a second. I thought viruses and antibiotics doesn't affect viruses, but antibodies are different than antibiotics?
Yes. So antibiotics are small molecules, like small compounds, small chemical compounds that have very high specificity for very small parts of proteins, and they only work in bacteria, but they will essentially target things that the bacterium needs to survive. So, proteins that the bacteria needs to replicate its DNA, or things that the bacteria needs to maintain its membranes and things like that. So it attacks essential parts, and they're small molecule, small chemical compounds that are very specific for what they do.
So antibiotics are like duct tape over the mouth of the virus that feeds it.
Antibodies are different. So antibodies are proteins that are produced by your immune system. So when you get sick with something, whether it's a bacterial or viral infection, your body senses that it has an infection. It surveils for it, and then what it does is it mounts what's called an antibody response, meaning that your body produces these proteins that are shaped like a Y, that are highly specific for the pathogen that you are infected with, and that helps sort of focus the immune system towards that virus or that bacterium to eliminate it. So it's almost like a homing beacon for the immune system.
So antibodies are not a vaccine.
Yes and no. So a traditional vaccine is if you get like an attenuated or an inactivated form of a virus or a bacterium, that's given to you as like a shot. Kind of like polio or tetanus or something like the tetanus vaccine or the whooping cough vaccine. That's given to you. That's actually parts or a weakened form of the pathogen is given to you, and your body's allowed to make, or the flu vaccine, your body's allowed to make an immune response in the form of antibodies, so that the next time that you actually see that pathogen in real life, those antibodies are on board to protect you. So that's a traditional vaccine. A passive vaccine is if you were to take those antibodies from an immunized person, or in this case, we're doing a mouse, an immunized person, and then give those antibodies to somebody else who hasn't received that actual vaccine. So now you're actually transferring that antibody response that one person has, giving it to somebody else. So now when they get that pathogen, they have those antibodies on board to neutralize it or prevent it. So that's called a passive vaccine. So antibodies, it's a lot of like weird nomenclature, but in the traditional sense, as the public would understand it, a vaccine is something you're given like a weakened form of the pathogen or a part of the pathogen in your arm. Your body makes an immune response to it, which includes the formation of antibodies. A passive vaccine or an antibody therapy is where you're taking the antibodies from somewhere else and then you're giving that to a patient without having to administer the weakened pathogen or a part of the pathogen. Or
it's like a secondary vaccination. It's like
exactly
via a middleman. Okay, or middle mouse.
Middle mouse. Yeah. So the other way, so you can do this in mice. The other way to do it is to go take it from what's called convalescent patients that had the disease and recuperated from it. So because they had the disease, the virus, they generated antibodies from it. So you can actually take their blood and isolate these cells in their blood that produce antibodies called B cells, and find the B cells that produce the antibodies that are specific for the virus, take those antibodies, scale them up, manufacture them, and then give those antibodies to patients who haven't seen the virus.
The people who get the coronavirus and recovered, could they make money off this? Like, do they get paid from big pharmaceutical companies to get those antibodies out?
I don't think so. I'm not sure how
I shouldn't even have asked that, because there's going to be some young people saying, "Give me the coronavirus. I need to make some money."
No, I'm not really sure how that part of it works. So antibody therapy, that's sort of the second prong. The third prong is the vaccine, because the vaccine will give you long-lived protection. Hopefully, we hope. But there are some issues with vaccines too. Not what the anti-vaxxers are talking about, just in the development of them and just testing for the safety and stuff like that. So they have to be carefully tested and validated. But then
that's the longest. That's the one that will take a year and a half, you said.
Yeah. And then there's a fourth prong, which is something that we should all be doing right now, which is the social distancing. So stopping the spread of it between individuals is something that we can do immediately to reduce the burden of disease in the public, to buy us time to develop the therapy so that we can administer that therapy to the public to really bring the numbers down after that.
Okay. If this coronavirus keeps that exponential curve going, isn't a year and a half too late for the third prong, the vaccine?
Well, no, I don't think so, because there's always the possibility of resurgence of the virus. So, a question that is something we don't know, especially in like China. China was really strict with social distancing and quarantining whole cities and things like that, which is something you can easily get away with in China because it's China. There's a concern that now that the cases in China are going down and you're having more people recover than you have getting infected, can the virus come from outside China now and reseed in China and start another outbreak? So we're gonna, whatever the outcome is in the next couple of months, as far as like the peak of the virus, burden, we're gonna want therapies and vaccines no matter what.
Okay. But still, it sounds like to me the best bet is to get the antibodies from mice and inject it into humans, right?
The best bet is to get whatever works out there the fastest. That's if it's, the kitchen sink approach by finding something that's already approved for something else and put it out there, so be it, get it out there. If it's the antibody approach, so be it, get it out there. If it's the vaccine, get it out there. It's sort of like all hands on deck at this point.
Okay, so what about the people who say this is no big deal, this is just the flu, everything's blown out of proportion? What say you?
So the flu has a mortality rate of about 0.1%, and a lot of people do die of the flu every year, which is why it's critically important that everyone should get their flu vaccine every year. Even though it may not provide full protection some years, it may provide some partial protection, which if you get the flu, could be the difference between life or death if you get a serious flu. The difference.
Oh, wait a minute. What you just said. So people who had a serious flu in the month of January this year, you're saying they might have a better chance of fighting the coronavirus?
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, you didn't say that?
No. I was saying that just in respect to flu, is that if you should always get the flu vaccine every year, because flu does kill a lot of people.
Oh, okay.
It just has nothing to do with coronavirus.
Okay, so I was reading the live stream chat, so I was a little distracted.
No. You should always get the flu vaccine, because the flu vaccine, even though some years it may not be fully protective against the flu strains that are circulating, it may provide partial protection, and meaning that if you get the flu and you have a severe case of it, if you've been immunized against it, it
Right.
could mean the difference between life or death, because you have that partial protection on board from the flu vaccine. So, so that's the flu does not, but getting the flu does not make you resistant to getting coronavirus. Two very different viruses. That's different. So is the flu like coronavirus? And I don't like that people are saying, and I think people are moving away from this, and that it's not like the coronavirus, and we should not treat the coronavirus like the flu. And the difference being is that with the flu, we have therapeutics and vaccines for the flu. We have a flu vaccine. We have drugs like Tamiflu that you can take to help reduce some of your symptoms. For the coronavirus, we have nothing. We literally have nothing. It's a novel coronavirus, meaning that the human species, Homo sapiens, their immune systems have never seen this. So we have no, residual immunity to this. We don't have any current immunity. We have nothing. So that's why it's different. Additionally, we still don't know yet, but it is likely that this may be a bit more contagious than the flu. Right now, estimates that it kind of puts it at the flu, and you look at like the level of contagion for many different pathogens, like measles is super contagious. It's like one of the most contagious viruses out there, the measles virus. I can be in a gymnasium all the way in one end, cough or whatever, and spread the measles virus to someone who's all the way at the end of the other side of a gymnasium. It's that contagious. Flu and coronavirus aren't as contagious as that, but are still highly contagious. But all this data will read out once this pandemic is over, and we can really start to assess whether this actually was more contagious than the flu or not. But it's something that needs to be looked at.
Have you seen any data on? There was a question in the live stream chat about this. Have you seen any data on if I sneeze on a door handle with a regular flu versus if I sneeze on a door handle with the coronavirus, the lifetime that virus can stay on that door handle without dying?
So this means the coronavirus is a fomite, meaning that it's a pathogen that can remain infectious after it's been on a surface for a prolonged period of time. And there are a number of studies out there with a wide range of time points that suggest that the virus can survive on surfaces. We know that you can get infected from a contaminated surface with the virus, but there are many things that will dictate how long that virus is viable on that surface. Everything from the type of surface that it's on, the temperature of the surface and the ambient temperature, the humidity in the environment, and whether there's humidity on the surface as well. So I've seen numbers anywhere from 9 hours up to 9 days. So it's so I think just the good practice is to clean surfaces in general. If you're worried that it's been contaminated with it.
Yeah. So we don't know if living in warmer climates makes you less likely to get the coronavirus versus in cold temperatures.
So that's another thing that it gets to seasonality of the virus. And that's another thing that we don't know yet. The flu virus is a seasonal virus. It peaks in the winter, and then it goes down in the spring and the summer, and then you start to see it go up again during the fall and the winter months. This virus hasn't been around long enough to know if it's a seasonal virus. And based on the patterns of the spread of the virus right now throughout the world, it's still too early to tell if that's the case. I would not, given the seriousness of it, we have to behave like it's not a seasonal virus to help contain it.
So what's your personal opinion on how bad this could get?
I don't want to make estimates, but we should heed the advice of the CDC. Social distancing is really important. Stay home if you can stay home. Don't go into, try to avoid gatherings of more than 10 people. Don't go to restaurants and bars and things like that. And particularly for the elderly, those who are elderly and especially elderly with secondary conditions. Are highly susceptible to complications from this. So being the most at risk, they're the ones that you don't want them to get the virus. They should be staying home really and avoiding this.
I heard I forget where I read this, and this definitely could be wrong, but I heard that or read that 50% of the people in ICUs in Italy are under the age of 50, and that kind of scared me a little bit.
Yeah, I've heard Anthony Fauci was talking about this a little bit, and I think something we also have to understand is that the virus likely does not behave the same way in every country. You can look at the number of deaths that were in South Korea relative to the number of cases that they had.
So are you saying this virus is a racist?
And even in China, right? So there are a lot of variables that we just don't know how they're going to affect things in the long term. But things such as the homogeneity of the population, whether the population is the homogeneity of the population, the relative age of the population. Italy does have an older population. China has a lot of smokers. And then also it will come down to things like the government's response to this,
Yeah.
will also affect things as well. So there are a lot of variables, and it's going to be different for each country, and that's kind of how we're seeing it play out right now.
Yeah. See, like China had 81,000 infected, 3,000 deaths. So that's what, a 5% kill rate. Italy has 31,000 infected, 2,500 deaths. So that's a much, what is that? 6% kill rate, 7%? Wow.
And the other thing you also have to keep, it's hard to determine the mortality rates from these maps because what we also know is that, or I don't know if it's set in stone, but it's believed that there can be asymptomatic carriers of the virus. So you can be infected or have the virus and not display any symptoms. So you would never get tested. Or even if you have even mild symptoms, you likely would not get tested. You would just brush it off as a regular cold or something like that. So those numbers are not going to be reflected in the confirmed cases because those people likely didn't take the time to get tested because they didn't think that they don't know that they have it, or it's not serious enough for them to go get tested. So there's probably way more people that are carrying the virus or infected with the virus than is actually being confirmed. So that would also change the mortality rates. But some of those models have been run, and even so, with that, you're looking, if flu has like a mortality rate of 0.1%, this still has a mortality rate of 1%. So this is still 10 times more lethal than the flu.
Whoa. I on Sunday I was looking, by the way, I'll put the link to this in the description. This is the John Hopkins map that actually Pete showed me first a while back. I remember on Sunday predicting, okay, by Wednesday there should be over 6,000 cases in the United States based on that curve, the parabolic curve. We already are over 6,000 and it's Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, and this is, I want to get back to like highlighting the power of, the importance of social distancing. Do you have the flatten the curve graph anywhere?
Yeah, I can bring it up.
Pull that up, because this is very important for people to understand.
But basically, right now, the United States is on pace to have more people infected than Italy, and Italy's in second place right now behind China. Because I think the current rates are doubling every 72 hours.
Yeah, so that's another thing that, as a microbiologist, the thing that you learn the most about is exponential growth. And I guess if you're in finance too, you know about exponential growth, especially when it comes to compounding interest. So
Yeah.
But essentially, if things are doubling, every few days, you essentially start off at a slow rate, and then, or a small number of cases, and then you reach an inflection point where everything essentially just goes vertical. We're getting to that inflection point. So that's the scary part. So this is the buzzword. I actually want to get a T-shirt made that says hashtag flatten the curve, or flattening the curve, and why this is important. So what we're seeing in Italy is the first big peak. So if we don't implement protective measures, social distancing, and things like that to limit the spread of the virus, what you have is this rapid contagion that happens amongst the population, and the number of infections goes way up. Our healthcare systems have a certain threshold for the number of cases that they can actually handle. So this means the number of hospital beds, ventilators, personal protective equipment that is available for the nurses and doctors and things, just the staff themselves too, the number of staff that you have to treat patients. If we have this rapid, or like what Italy had, this rapid increase in the number of cases, we will actually exceed the capacity of our healthcare system to deal with that level of disease within the population. And what happens then is, what's happening in Italy is where hospitals are going to have to start making tough decisions as to who lives and who dies, based on the seriousness of this. So we do not want to get to that point, and it's going to be a challenge not getting to this point where we breach the threshold of our healthcare system. So by what's called flattening the curve, if we institute protective measures such as social distancing, like don't go out, don't interact with people, keep at least 6 feet distance between the next person. If you do have to go out, sanitize your surfaces, wash your hands, don't touch your face and your mouth and your nose, those types of things. If we, follow that as extremely as possible, we can flatten that curve and we can slow the rate of contagion. And the goal is to flatten it to a point where we actually, while we might not reduce the number of cases of infections, we can spread it out over a longer period of time and keep the cases at any given point below the threshold of our healthcare capacity. Not only that, but it also buys us time to make the therapy and the vaccine so that we can get that out to the population and then really drop the numbers even further after that. The other thing, one more thing I want to say about flattening the curve is that, I forgot what I was going to say.
Yeah, basically by extending the time, you might have the same number of cases, but at least now you can attend to them because they're not coming all in one shot.
Right, and there's people who have all other sorts of illnesses too that require hospitalization at any given time.
Right.
So just think about what their outcome is going to be if the health system is overloaded with all these patients.
I was saying to my wife, don't break your leg over the next 2 months because like the hospitals are going to be full of people with this virus, and you having a broken leg is not going to be a high priority.
Now is a really bad time to run with scissors. You don't want to run with scissors right now. You don't want to run with scissors ever, but particularly now, you don't want to do that. So there was a really good. Can you post links in your chat?
Yeah.
Did I send you that link? Washington Post article on where they actually did models of what social distancing, the impact that it can have on these curves. So they had models where there was no social distancing, and you can see that the curve rises very quickly. And
is that with the bouncing balls type thing?
Yeah, the bouncing balls. Yeah. Do you have that link?
No, I don't, but I can put it in the description later, maybe.
Is Reed watching? If Reed is watching, he may be able to. I know he saw it.
I think he's in transit away from LA to his parents' place.
You know what? I'll pull it up. But anyways, it's a really great article that actually shows modeling of how flattening the curve works, and how if you actually designate individuals that don't move and stuff, you can see how the rate of contagion really slows down. Flattening the curve, Washington Post. Let's see. Oh, here we go. I'm going to put this in our messenger, and you can
in Facebook.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
So that was a really good article. And what's cool about the models that they use here is that they're randomly generated models. So when you go back to the page, you won't get the same result, the same exact result that you got the first time you saw it, because it's randomly generated. So that's pretty cool.
Oh yeah. So yeah, this shows for the people out there who say, "Oh, this is not serious. I don't need to stay in my house." It shows you how quickly a virus can spread just by going out. And they have like a little barrier here. So if you keep infected people separated and then open up that barrier, you can just see how it very quickly spreads. And you don't even know it because you might have 0 symptoms and you could still have the virus.
All right. What's cool? So that's not really social distancing in this model right now. What you're showing, that's like what border restriction would do. This, right, where they've actually isolated individuals, this is what social distancing is, and you can see that the rate of contagion is much slower and gives you more time for the people who are infected to be to recover.
Right.
And then this one, and it shows like the levels, the degrees in which you can restrict this movement.
Yeah, it's tough to know just what, like, being panicked about something could actually save your life. Like if there's a lion chasing you, but it's
Well, there's a level of panic, right?
right.
You don't want to be so panicked that you're paralyzed and you don't know what to do, but you also want to be informed and prepared. Um, and I think that's probably the most critical. And in a thing like this, one thing we have to understand is that our behavior, what we do as an individual, has implications for the people around us. So we can't just be thinking about ourselves when we're thinking about this virus. We really, literally need to be thinking about our families around us, our neighbors, our communities, our towns, and greater. So it's one of these things that we all have to engage in this behavior together, in synchronicity, to really have an impact.
I got some questions here. I didn't really read through them, but I've been tagged. I've heard, this is from Rai Rez, I've heard from a virologist, there we go, that a general vaccine for coronavirus might have some effect. Can he share his thoughts on this? So is it possible or plausible that a general vaccine might have some effect on this virus?
So I think what he was trying to get out is, because the coronavirus is a family of viruses. The SARS virus was a coronavirus. The MERS virus, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome virus, was a coronavirus. The actual name, actually, one thing I should clear up, and we can, if you want, go into more of the molecular details of the virus, which is actually what more molecular details of pathogens is more of my specialty. And I'll send you a link, Doug, that you can put up that I think is pretty cool. And actually how it infects cells and what it does, and things like that. But so the coronaviruses are a family of viruses, and I guess what it sounds like is, can we get a vaccine that protects against many of these coronaviruses? The actual name of this virus is SARS-CoV-2. So severe acute respiratory syndrome corona COV virus -2 number 2, because the first one was SARS. CoV was the first SARS outbreak in 2002, 2003. The disease is called COVID-19. So COVID is CO for corona, V for virus, the D is for disease, and then 19 because it was discovered in 2019. So SARS-CoV-2 is the name of the virus that's going around. COVID-19 is the name of the disease that people are experiencing. So can we get a pan-corona vaccine? I think that's something that people are working on. I know in the antibody field, people are looking at antibodies that patients had developed against the first SARS virus to see if they can cross-react with the novel coronavirus. And we do know that some of the important proteins on the surface of the virus that are important for infecting your cells are fairly well conserved between the first SARS virus and this novel coronavirus. And that's something that companies are looking at to see if we can take the antibodies from the old outbreak and repurpose them for this, or modify them in ways to make them efficacious against this. Another thing I want to point out too is with the vaccines, why they have to be vetted very carefully to test to see if they're safe, is because you can have an effect called ADE, which is antibody-dependent enhancement. And what this means is that it is possible, we don't know yet, we don't know this for coronaviruses in general just yet, but it is possible, and for some pathogens this has been shown, that if you get vaccinated against a certain pathogen, you can develop an antibody response, and those antibodies binding to the surface can actually enhance the ability of the virus to infect your cells. So that's called ADE, antibody-dependent enhancement, and that's something that has to be tested for to make sure that the vaccine is effective and that it doesn't actually make the disease even worse. This was something that was seen in a vaccine for dengue virus. They showed that that the vaccine actually made the disease worse, and there is a paper out there where they actually gave a coronavirus vaccine to cats. And the cats that got the vaccine actually did worse than the cats that didn't get the vaccine. There was higher death amongst the cats with the vaccine than the ones with it.
So you want to get it right the first time. You don't want to screw this up with the vaccines.
Exactly.
And speaking of cats, do you know if animals can get the coronavirus?
So, well, the coronavirus originated in animals, in bats. So we know that animals are, at least bats.
Let me be more specific. Our pet dogs, our pet cats, our pet birds.
I think I'm not up to date on the most recent literature, but I have heard that there may have been a report of a dog having, or a cat having, the virus. Again, don't take my word for this, but we don't know, I guess, is really and I don't know if the animal gets sick from it, but can it carry it and give it to somebody else? We don't really know.
What about mosquitoes?
I have not seen any reports of I've not heard of any reports of a mosquito carrying the virus.
Okay. TX Alpha Deck asks Dr. Pete, heard of any testing using chloroquine?
Yeah, chloroquine is the drug for malaria. There's some evidence in vitro, again, in test tubes, that it may have an effect on the virus. Again, one of these things, still too early to tell. Has to be tested. There's, like I said, they're literally throwing everything that's already been approved at this virus to see that it works, which is a very hard task because the way viruses work, which is different from bacteria. Bacteria are sort of essentially like independent organisms. They're living. They have their own life cycle. They contain all the machinery to live, to survive, and the machinery that they have to live and survive is different enough from the machinery that we need to survive, the proteins and stuff like that, that we can develop antibiotics which can kill bacteria but don't really kill us. They don't have an effect on us. Since a virus is different, because a virus is dependent on a host, on us, to replicate and to continue its life cycle. So it uses a lot of our own machinery to do that. So when you're developing a drug against a virus, you got to be careful that that drug isn't actually targeting something that is important for us to survive, because these viruses use a lot of these things for their own life cycle. So developing drugs against viruses is a much more difficult task.
It sounds a bit like chemotherapy.
It could be in some ways. It could be.
So, in a very simple layman's terms, how does a virus work? Is it like you got a cell membrane, a healthy cell? The virus comes and does what?
So the virus will come and attach. And then it will enter into the cell through a number of different ways. It could either fuse its membrane with the host membrane, or it can get taken up into what's called a vesicle. Either way, the virus gets into the cell. It then releases its genetic components, because viruses have DNA, releases it into the cell. Many times it will encode some machinery to help it replicate that genetic material. The genetic material can be in the form of DNA or RNA and different flavors of that. Single-stranded DNA, double-stranded DNA, single or double-stranded RNA. It's called plus strand or minus strand RNA. There's many different versions of it. The classification scheme of these different viruses and their genetic information is called the Baltimore scheme, after David Baltimore, who was the first one to sort of classify these things. But they essentially use your host processes to replicate. So they'll use many of your proteins to replicate and maintain their DNA. They'll use your machinery to produce their own proteins, so that they can be repackaged again. And then when they repackage themselves, they repackage their DNA into the viral membrane or protein capsid, and then it gets released from the cell. And when it does that, it ends up killing the cell that it's come out of.
Oh, because it kind of just like explodes out and just demolishes the cell?
It can happen in many different ways. It can bleb off the cell. It can create enough stress in the cell where the cell ends up dying. There's a couple of mechanisms by which it can release. Additionally, your cells have innate sensors for viruses and things, and when they sense it, the inflammatory response gets kicked on too. So that alerts the immune system to that site, which can exacerbate things even more. So, but essentially gets into your cell, uses your cell's machinery to help it to replicate, and then leaves the cell, and then when it does that, creates significant damage in its wake.
So since a virus is so dependent on us, really a virus that has a 2% or 3% kill rate is way more dangerous than a virus that has a 90% kill rate, right? You know what I mean?
It depends on the metric that you're. Well, say that one more time, because I might be thinking of something different than what you're thinking.
So if you have a virus that kills 90% of the people it infects versus a virus that kills only 2 or 3%, it's going to die off faster because it basically kills its host. It's that it's dependent on. It's killing the hand that feeds them.
Right.
And so in a way, a virus that has only a 2 or 3% kill rate on the general population is way more dangerous overall than a virus that kills 90% of people.
A pathogen, even though it makes us sick and can kill us, it really doesn't want to kill us because it needs us to spread.
Yes.
So what these things, these genetic innate molecules essentially want to do is they want to survive, and they need the vector to continue to grow and to survive and to survive. So yeah, if you have a very high mortality rate, then you're essentially killing off your host, and you may be doing it so fast that the host doesn't have time to spread you to its next victim. And this is why this virus in particular is such a huge catastrophe, because what it does is it gets a lot of people sick. It kills a lot of people, but more importantly, it gets a lot of people sick. And because it gets a lot of people sick, that requires us to expend a lot of resources to take care of those sick people. So a virus with a much lower mortality rate on a societal impact can have way more effects than a virus that has like a super high mortality rate.
Rez asks, are those N95 masks any good?
There's different versions of them. There are ones that like really seal over your face very tightly. But the suggestion is that the people who should be wearing the N95 masks are the medical professionals that are taking care of patients to reduce their exposure, and the people who are sick, so that when they cough, the virus isn't just flying out into the environment. So they are rated. The N95 masks, especially the ones that have a nice seal around your face, are good at eliminating particles. But the ones that should be wearing them are the sick and the first responders.
Yeah. Chen asks, I think we sort of already answered this. What's his opinion on malaria and HIV drugs being used to counter COVID-19?
We talked about the malaria drug. I think the jury's still out on that. I'm not sure if there's a lot of. I think there was a lot of excitement because it's a malaria drug repurposing, but I'm just not sure if there's within the scientific community. I heard Scott Gottlieb, who was the former head of the FDA, on TV yesterday, who didn't seem that enthusiastic about it. I saw a report today that the HIV drugs do not work. So that someone should verify that, but I saw a news report that those don't seem to be having an effect.
Emil asks, is it sure that if to have some immunity if you've already been infected? Yeah, Pete basically said earlier that you can get it again, and maybe a different version of it though, like a slightly modified.
No. So the answer is it looks like you do develop an antibody response to the virus. It's likely that you develop some sort of immediate protection after getting it. It looks like it. We haven't been able to assess that much yet. It looks like by us, I mean the government, healthcare professionals. I'm not the government. The question is, is it going to provide long-term protection? And we just don't know that yet. I think there might have been a couple of reports in China of someone getting infected twice, but a lot of it is, were they tested properly the first time? Did they really have it the first time? Did they not? Did they have the flu first but thought it was? So there's a lot of questions surrounding that. It's likely, we know that you do develop antibodies to this after getting infected. But as far as the length of immunity that is developed after infection, And we're just gonna have to wait and see to find out what that's like.
I think was I talking with you the other day about this whole testing thing that's going to happen in the U.S. Like, I think they're going to have testing stations, drive-through stations at Walgreens, CVS, Walmart, Target.
So I'm in New York. I'm right in the hot zone. New Rochelle, New York is right down the street from us over here. They have a drive-up testing set up there. National Guard is over there, and they have people in full PPE, protective personal equipment, personal protective equipment, swabbing people as they drive through. Yeah.
I'm curious what that's going to do to the psychology of the general population. Like right now, John Hopkins has, that's the wrong one. John Hopkins map has US at 6420. I've heard some medical professionals say that in Ohio alone, there could be 100,000 people infected. And
yeah,
like what's going to happen to the psyche of the average human in the United States when we see this, because of all the testing that we're doing, that number is going to jump from 6,000 to 60,000 to 600,000.
Well, the number's going to go up for two reasons. One, there are more people infected out there than we're testing. So as we test more, we're going to see the numbers go up. So that's one way it's going to go up, and it's going to go up also because the virus is spreading. So you're also, developing more cases too. It's all part of this exponential curve that we're on right now. And I think Anthony Fauci puts it best. When you think you're ahead of the virus, or if you're here and you think you have an edge on the virus is actually here. We are always going to be at a disadvantage and wagging behind the virus. We're always playing catch up with it. So that's why getting this testing out as fast as possible is really important to sort of get some accurate numbers.
My open mind says virus agents are not sentient, but you're both describing it as if it has a mind. It doesn't. Are we describing it like it has a mind?
I think just for simplicity's sake, it's just easier to describe it that way, but it is not. It is not sentient. No.
Is it true that there have been versions of this virus around previously? Yeah, we answered that. SARS-1, right? There was a virus going around here in New York, in North Carolina in January with a fever and a cough.
So that's a good. We're also in flu season right now. So that just makes things even worse. That the flu is also flying around. I know in my office alone, lots of people were out with the flu at the end of last year, the beginning of this year. So that definitely complicates things. We have people in the hospitals currently with flu, so that takes up beds and space, right? Because they have to be tended to as well. And also we're getting into the spring now. We're also in allergy season. So people are having runny noses and sneezing and may have like a scratchy throat and stuff. So there's a lot of sort of confounding things going on at the same time that complicate things like whether people think that they really have this virus or not. But you should be vigilant, and things like fever, dry cough, difficulty breathing and stuff. You need to pay attention to those things.
Like
body aches.
Yeah, 3 weeks ago, I woke up and it felt like literally someone had taken a baseball bat and just batted my whole body down. I could barely move. I had a slight fever, but it wasn't too bad. But then 48 hours, or maybe 72 hours later, I was fine. And my son had it. I thought it was just a common flu. My son had it a week before, and his fever went up all the way to 104. And I was considering putting him in an ice bath. And we not for 1 second thought it was the coronavirus, but it might have been. I don't know.
It's hard to say, unless you've been tested. And it's another important thing is, people ask, well, if you do have it and then you recover, how soon can you go out and, back into the public or whatnot? One, you shouldn't be going into the public until the government says it's safe to do so, just to maintain that whole social distancing thing. Also, right now, the standard for for determining if you're clear of the virus is if you test positive for the virus, then you have the virus. If you develop symptoms and then your symptoms resolve, it's not until you've been tested again twice, 24 hours apart, and both of those tests come back negative, they can definitively say that you no longer have it.
Practical.
So just resumption of symptoms is not enough to say that you are no longer having the virus, because it's believed that for actually a pretty significant period of time after symptoms resolve, you can still shed the virus, and you run the risk of contaminating people, of infecting people. There are also people who will display no symptoms whatsoever and have the virus, shedding the virus, and can infect people that way also. So you have to almost feel like everyone around you is carrying this, which is why the social distancing is so important.
If your spouse gets it, or any family member that you live with gets it, is there any use to distance yourself from them at that point, or just assume you have it too?
It's hard to say. I think the most important thing is if you have vulnerable people in your house. So if you have elderly people in your house, people with secondary, even a young person with a secondary condition, isolating the person who is sick to one area of the house may be the smartest thing, and having that person who is susceptible or highly vulnerable, at another side of the house to reduce the potential of exposure.
My open mind says this virus wasn't seen outside China until mid-January. It wasn't the cause of people's coughs in New York in December, January.
Say that again. What was it?
Someone's commenting that the virus didn't go outside of China, or wasn't seen outside of China until mid-January. Yeah, I remember that too. That's when the first reports came out of China of someone having the coronavirus. But it still does. Someone could still have had it before then and just not known it. But yeah, it's sobering.
I also, I think I told you this last night, but this is not to create an alarm or anything like that, but just to sort of give you an idea of like the impact of a virus like this. There was a really good documentary on PBS about 11 years ago called "The Living Weapon," and it was a documentary on America's biowarfare program. And after World War II, we had recruited a number of scientists from Japan because Japan and China were working on biowarfare agents to learn about biowarfare agents. And one thing that was learned from that program, that has since ceased. This was during the nuclear era and stuff in the 50s. And what they learned from that is that the most potent biological weapon was one that didn't create mass death, but was one that actually created mass illness. Because if you had a lot of illness that required the enemy or the person who was exposed to the country that was exposed to that to use more resources to treat all that illness, and that was actually more destructive to that community, to that country, than just wiping a bunch of people out. Now, this virus is not biowarfare. I'm not conflate. I don't want to conflate the two by any means, but just to highlight that why this is having such a high impact on us is because we're seeing such high amounts of illness associated with that, and that is consuming a lot of resources and is requiring society to make really strong behavioral changes to prevent or to mitigate the spread of the virus. So again, there's no conspiracy theory here. This was a natural event that happened, but there was just a lesson learned on the impact of illness on a society was learned from that program in the 50s.
Jeremy F., how long until we can get back to normal life? Also, what are the chances of this exploding again after we recover from this epidemic? Get out your crystal ball, Pete.
It could be a while. It could be a couple of months. It really depends on the trajectory of the curve. And also it depends on the ability to develop therapies and get the therapy and the vaccines out there that will help flatten the curve. is by
Well,
by doing that.
the worst case scenario that I see is that number in China of 81,000 start to go parabolic again. Then we know we're in for the long haul.
And that's a concern, I'm sure, amongst the Chinese, is that, you have all these cases around the world, their numbers are going down. What if another case from outside of China comes in and reseeds another community in China? And you see, China has over 1 billion people. There's still a lot of people that can get infected there. So, that's I'm sure that's definitely a concern. Another site I want to share, Doug, if you can put this up. There is another thing that we have to also be aware of, and I'm sure this is being looked into when developing therapies and vaccines, is just like any pathogen or any living organism, or any organism, I guess I can say, you don't have to be living. I'm going to post this in Facebook here.
Got it.
Is that it mutates. It changes over time. As these things replicate, they introduce errors into their genetic information, which leads to mutation, which allows allows for variation in these viruses and bacteria and stuff that cause disease. So this is a group of a bioinformatics consortium amongst many different agencies around the world that is actually, as people are getting infected throughout the world, they're taking hospital systems or academic labs and stuff are taking the viruses from patients and actually sequencing the genomes of these viruses. And they're comparing that sequence to the original sequence that was first published in China, the first available sequence, to see how the strain is, how the virus is evolving over time and as it spreads throughout the world. And you can just see this is what's called a phylogenetic tree, where you can see all the way to the left would be where the first available sequenced virus of coronavirus was. And you can see how the branches of the tree now over time, how it's diverged as it's spread across the planet. And if you scroll down, there's actually like an animation that they play. If you hit play there, the two things. Well, before you hit play, this is a map showing how it, these different how this genetic variation sort of has spread across the world. And if you scroll down even more, Doug.
Yep.
Right there, what you're seeing is actually the entire viral genome, and these peaks are just the frequency of changes that we're seeing within the different parts of the virus. And like, again, if we want to talk more about the virus itself, we can do.
Okay, but which genome is the vaccine going to be targeting? Like, is
Yeah, so most people are using the first published genome from China. That was made available, and the reason for that is that a lot of these programs actually started in January. They started as soon as the genome was made public. So that's the genome that they're using. And one of the things that they'll study is to see if the vaccine and these therapies and stuff are effective against different variants of this virus as well. So I can assure you that it's going to be tested for that also.
Yeah. Wow. But they're still in the same kind, though, right? There's no proof of evolution here.
That word "kind," Doug.
That was for you, Kent Hovind, if you ever listen to this. So this is showing how. Oh yeah. So one strain kind of.
So if you hit play again.
Okay.
You can see that you get the first variant pops up in China, and then that variant starts seeding other parts of the world. You see that the strain from the strain that is in the west coast of the United States is probably more closely related to the original Chinese strain than what it is to what is in Europe.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I guess scientists are having a heyday with all this data and all.
I pretty much stare at this stuff most of the day. The other part of this is when we're developing therapies and vaccines, it's really good to actually to know what the structure of the proteins on the viral surface looks like. So there have been labs across the world that have identified these proteins. A lot of the knowledge came from studies with SARS and MERS, when those outbreaks happened, but have generated crystal structures of the virus surface protein bound to the human receptor. And that provides really important information because we can actually see what these structures look like. And when we develop therapies, we can pinpoint the exact precise locations where we would want to inhibit on those proteins to block those interactions from happening. So to block the virus receptor, the virus is called the spike protein, from attaching to the human receptor protein.
Wow. What's your opinion on what Britain did?
The behavioral stuff?
Yeah, they basically didn't.
I think they've walked that back now.
Oh, have they?
Yeah.
They purposely went against flattening the curve and said, we need to build herd immunity. Let's go. And the psychology of, if you quarantine people too early, they're going to go nuts and they're going to break the quarantine.
Yeah. So I think people have to understand the difference, what herd immunity means in the context of vaccination and in the context of infection. In the context of vaccination, herd immunity means you are vaccinated with an attenuated or inactive form or a piece of a pathogen. So that doesn't make you sick. You don't get the flu from the flu virus, from the flu vaccine. You don't get whooping cough from the pertussis vaccine. But you're immunized.
You sound like you were from New Jersey there for a second.
I did it. You get a cough.
Whooping cough.
You get a cough. You get a little this. You get a little that. It almost creeped up there. But you get vaccinated with this, right? And you produce your immune response to it so that when you receive that pathogen normally in the environment, you're now immune to it. And if everyone gets that vaccine, then, or the majority of people, let's say 98 people get the vaccine out of 100, 98 people have that vaccine, that's when you have a herd immunity. So that if those two people, for some reason, they couldn't have the vaccine, they're immunocompromised or something, and they get exposed to that, it's less likely to spread to them. One, because you have all these immunized people around you who aren't able to spread the virus. And two, if they get exposed, they are unable to transmit it to other people because they're immunized. So that reduces the initial cases of infection and death that could come from having the infection because you've been pre-vaccinated with it. That's herd immunity in the context of vaccination. In the context of infection, herd immunity means that everyone gets the infection, everyone develops that immunity so that the few people who didn't get the infection are less likely to get it at that point. The problem with that is that you need a lot of people to get the infection first. And this is an infection that causes a lot of disease and death. So that means you're going to have a lot of people that are going to be ill, utilizing healthcare resources, dying, doing all that stuff. So that's kind of like what the anti-vaxxers say. Your body naturally produces an immune response to things. And it's like, well, no, people die from yes, your body produces an immune response, but people also die from these infections. So I think they've been forced to walk back that strategy now.
Well, it might be too late, right?
It's always too late when it comes to these things. You're always behind, the infection itself.
Is there any evidence that the worst case symptoms for people under 50 with no pre-existing conditions due to cytokine storm like the 1918 flu?
Cytokine storm. So cytokine storm is when I mentioned you get infected with the virus. The virus triggers your immune response. It also creates causes a lot of cells to die as the virus is replicating and things like that. And what that does is it triggers the immune response. Part of the immune response being activated is it releases these small signaling proteins called cytokines. And they're small signaling molecules that help activate other parts of the immune system to come and tackle the disease. The problem with that, though, is you can have hyperactivation of this. And when the immune response, part of the immune response coming in to tackle the disease, requires that your immune response kills some of your cells, some of your healthy cells. So you want an immune response that is effective at eliminating the infection and the infected cells, but you don't want an immune response that's too big that it starts actually wreaking havoc on your healthy cells, and that can happen, and that could be the result of a cytokine storm where you're having too many of these signaling molecules being produced and released, which is hyperactivating the immune system and creating more. The virus ends up doing less damage to you at that point, and your immune system is what's doing the damage in the long run. So cytokine storm is something that they're seeing a lot in these serious cases and things like that.
Besides washing your hands and the stuff we already talked about, 100th monkey ass, is there anything other things we can do, like stopping drinking? Or, I've heard that if you're obese, you're more likely to have bad consequences from this virus. I think it's just general health, right? If your general health is poor, you're more susceptible to problems.
I think we have to err on that side of caution. Right? It's...
Like, should we all go on a 5-day fast and lose some weight?
I'm afraid that some of us are actually going to gain weight by sitting at home and not being as active. But, we got to do what we got to do for the time being.
I predict there's going to be a lot more babies born 9-10 months from now.
I've had this discussion with friends. We could the result of this could be Generation COVID.
Yeah. Inquisitive quandary: are mild cases of asthma considered one of the high-risk pre-existing conditions for SARS-CoV-2? I think so, right?
I think from what I think I've heard Anthony Fauci say is that people who have severe asthma should be a concern. I don't know. I think it's one of these things you want to err on caution. More reason to social distance, wash your hands, those types of things, because we're not entirely sure. And if you're a person that already has some sort of respiratory syndrome, adding another respiratory condition on top of that, such as the virus, do you want to play with fire like that? So, clinically, I'm not a physician, so I'm a scientist, PhD scientist, not an MD. So, to me, it's, err on the side of caution is what I would say.
I'm not sure if I understand this next. Who the World Health Organization says if you don't test, you are blind. What do you think of the weak testing in the USA? Well, I think that's going to change soon. It's going to be strong testing.
Soon, yeah. We should have been testing more to begin with earlier on, but that's. I'll let the politicians duke that one out. There's a lot more that we could have been doing, but human nature is such that we end up not taking things seriously until it's presented like right in front of our face, like things like global warming. I think there's going to be a lot of takeaways from this at the end. I have a couple of personal takeaways that I think I'd like to see come out of this, but something like listen to the scientists. Listen to the data. I think is something that's critically important when we think of things like climate change. This is we've predicted the for a long time that an outbreak like this can happen. We've seen it happen in the past with 1918 flu and other outbreaks in smaller areas of all sorts of types: bacterial, viral infections, parasitic outbreaks. We knew that this would happen at some point, and it will happen again in the future. When in the future, I don't know, but it will happen again. When it comes to things like climate change and stuff, we should heed the warnings of the professionals, the people that study this and have the data to support it, because we can prepare ourselves or prevent catastrophes from happening. The other thing I want to say is. What I really hope this also does is shed a light on the importance of infectious disease research of all flavors, whether it's viral diseases, parasitic diseases, bacterial infections. What we've seen in the pharmaceutical industry is that a lot of infectious disease programs are being eliminated. And the reason they're being eliminated is because it's not profitable to develop drugs against infectious diseases. The reason being is that, in the case with like vaccines or antibiotics, is that you get the infection, you take a course of antibiotics or an antiviral therapy, and you take it for a few days, and that's it. You don't have to take it again until maybe you get that infection some point in the distant future. It's much more profitable to produce drugs for chronic conditions like cardiovascular disease or arthritis or other things like that. Cancer is in many ways can be not chronic, but is prolonged over a patient's existence. So many companies have just abandoned infectious disease programs because of this reason. And in the field of infectious disease is one of the very few areas of medicine in which the majority outcome with intervention is cure. We can't say that with things like heart disease. We don't have a cure for heart disease. We have drugs and things that help reduce risk and help to mitigate things. But we don't have a cure for heart disease. In infectious disease, the majority outcome from the use of medicine is cure. And we need to remember that, especially when it comes to things like antibiotic resistance. It's predicted that by the year 2050, 10 million people a year will die from antibiotic-resistant infections. We're going crazy today over what's the total? The death count is like 8,000 people, 7,000 people dying from this virus so quickly.
Almost 8.
Think about 10 million people dying a year from an antibiotic-resistant bacterial infections. And we're dropping these programs because developing antibiotics is not profitable anymore. So I hope that this reinvigorates the importance or the need for these things going forward.
Yeah, so far I've been keeping politics and religion out of this, but I'll just say one thing as we close, and that is even if you're a believer in a God who protects you and comforts you and all these things that will never leave you, still be smart. I'm sure the God you believe in would want you to be smart and take the proper precautions and support even atheists like Pete, who might even saved a loved one's life through his research and work. Just don't, I've been reading things about churches still going on and 500 people packed in a room and saying God's going to protect us. Well, he might if he exists, but he may not. And it might be a guy like Pete who's actually going to protect you, not the God you worship. Too much? Too harsh?
I'll just say that these pathogens are agnostic. They don't care what political party you're a member of. They don't care what you believe. They don't care where you're from. They just want to survive. And that may be at the expense of you. So just keep that in mind.
There we go. I started the music. So thanks for coming on, Pete. We had, were you watching the YouTube?
I tried not to because it makes my brain tweak.
Poof. I poofed you out of existence.
Are we done? Are we still live?
We're still live. This is like the playful banter afterwards where you say what you really think. So you're supposed to say something like, "We're all gonna die."
I'm not gonna say that. That's not what I want.
I know. But thanks for hanging up.
I have been stocking up on food and stuff like that. So that's been important.
Thank you everyone who showed up. I know this is a little bit different than normal. I think it was important. Take care, guys. I'll probably be back tomorrow with something since a lot of people are at home and are bored.
Oh, my Twitter, @SciencePete.
Oh, Pete's Twitter's @SciencePete.
I think it's actually technically @SciencePeter. Let's see.
Pete's Twitter, @SciencePete.
No, it's not.
No?
Don't type in @SciencePete. It's @SciencePeter, but it's listed as SciencePete. So @SciencePeter.
@SciencePeter. Okay, so it's not SciencePete. @SciencePeter. And people, are you telling people can tweet you with questions? Is that what you're saying?
They can. I'm not on Twitter that much, so I don't know how much I'll respond. But if they got some other interest, I'll take a look.
Okay. People can't quite hear you right now, but
just have to tweet. Feel free to tweet.
Yeah, but they can feel free to tweet Pete, and if he can get back to you, he will. Okay, guys, take care.